We need to talk in today's video about Max Verstappen's contract clause because he could soon be free from red.
Bull, this
Is a rumor reported by Amos Automotor on Sport, and we will look at it over the course of the video. But first we really need to talk about the problem of lift and coast, which cost Ferrari 1.3 seconds. But above all, we need to understand what the origin of the problem is and whether it could also occur in other races. In the video we discuss Mercedes, the 2026 tests, and the Pirelli tires that will be used at Silverstone. I sincerely thank you for all the messages and comments, and I remind you that to support the channel all you need to do is leave a like. And now let's get started. Have you ever wondered why Ferrari constantly asks Claire to do lift and coast? Turn after turn, race after race, it's not just a matter of saving fuel. Behind that simple request hides one of the most serious and underestimated technical problems of the SF25.
I know.
Charles's driving style, not just the eclair, leads to him facing the gravest repercussions. In theory, lift and coast is simple. You let off the gas before the braking point, let the car coast for a few meters, and then brake. It's used to save fuel, cool the brakes, and in some cases to protect the car's underbody from contact with the asphalt. It seems to have become an obsession for Ferrari, especially for Leclerc, based on their team radio communication. In Spain, it was necessary to prevent the plank from wearing out too much during braking on a bumpy stretch like turn 1. But in Austria, the tune has changed. There, the request for lift and coast came from the reconnaissance lap itself.
In every
The reason? Ferrari's brakes are too stressed and must be protected at all times, even at the cost of a slower pit stop.
a redwood.
Ring. The SF25 was heavy at the start of the race and with very violent braking. The risk of overheating was very high. Maranello issued a clear order, LICO, meaning lift and coast everywhere immediately. Jerome D'Ambrosio confirmed post-race that everything focused on brake management, an ongoing issue for at least 2 seasons. Ferrari tries to avoid the brake topic like the plague, but the signs are clear. We remember Bahrain 2024? Unbalanced front brakes, and Leclerc was complaining about a car that was pulling to the right. Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile Raffica conducted targeted checks on car number 16 until a few days ago, searching for exact words. Asymmetric braking systems, but they found nothing irregular, but suspicions remain. And then there's Hamilton, who says that the brakes are a problem. They are brakes that are difficult to manage, too sensitive, that overheat. The point is that the brakes are supplied by Brembo, but the design and thermal management remain a direct responsibility of the team. And apparently Ferrari has decided to sacrifice something. But what in detail? The problem is in the thermal balance. To heat the tires, especially in qualifying, you need to use the excess heat from the front brakes. All teams do it, but Ferrari seems to go further. There are more closed cooling channels, more heat to the rims and tires that finally heat up. And so the qualifying performance improves, but the price is that the car in the race risks overheating everything too much. This is where the problem of extreme lift and coast arises, which is used to cool the brakes and a hybrid unit, and to lower the peaks of thermal energy to avoid damage and loss of performance. But why is this request almost always directed at Leclerc? Because Leclerc has a more aggressive driving style than Hamilton when braking, and this style requires cool, consistent, and reliable brakes. If you force him to let off the accelerator earlier and you can't load the front forcefully, Leclerc loses the soul of his driving style. The balance I prefer and lift and coast don't get along very well, Leclerc also said. And Ferrari continues to insist on this strategy to be gentle with the tires. To improve qualification, they must sacrifice the race. However, this choice backfires during the race itself. The brakes get too hot and you have to slow down.
And slow down.
In Formula 1, losing just 0.2 per lap over 70 laps adds up to a significant amount of time lost. But at Silverstone, the real enemy won't be the brakes, but the plank. In fact, braking is not a problem at Silverstone. Lower temperatures are expected. The main challenges will be ground clearance and bottom wear, particularly in high-speed corners. Here the lift and coast could come back, but more to protect the plank than to manage the brakes. And above all, the updates brought to Austria could finally help Ferrari to limit the damage and return to tracks like this with more confidence. But one thing is certain, as long as the thermal balance of brakes, tires is not perfectly optimized, the Leclerc will continue to pay the highest price. And so we will see this problem of lift and coast, especially on tracks with many brakes. I think, for example, of Monza, I think of Las Vegas, I also think in Mexico, where there are also higher temperatures and therefore the brakes are used more. Even in Brazil, there are few significant braking points. But there is a more rarefied air, so on those tracks where little air reaches the brakes, especially at the front, the drivers, especially Leclerc, will be asked to do lift and coast. And this has cost Ferrari 0.2 of a second per lap for 70 laps. In Austria, it's really an eternity, especially in terms of race pace. Obviously, the SF25 improves with less fuel and with a harder tire because you brake a little slower and have a lighter car. Moreover, the track's grip increases as it gets more rubberized, requiring less lift and coast over time. However, it's very important to do it at the start of the race, when the start and the gaps are minimal. The situation at Ferrari is problematic and needs to be resolved soon, because it's a big limitation compared to all the other top teams who seem to manage the cooling of the brakes and tires better. Ferrari must also find the right balance at Silverstone. As for the rear suspension, the floor and the balance of the car, we know that Ferrari's new rear suspension will arrive at Spa, so Ferrari will have to find the right compromise before this further update. But we have to talk about another thing that could happen right at Spa. Verstappen could leave Red Bull right after Spa, obviously on a theoretical level. In fact, there is a secret clause that would allow him to get out of the contract if he is not in the top 3 at the end of July. Max aims to reshape the team's internal power dynamics beyond just focusing on results. And if Horner doesn't give in, Max could do it. Yes, even to go to Mercedes or Stone Martin. Automotor, a sport publication, has revealed that Max has an exit clause in his contract. If he's not in the top 3 standings after the Spa race in late July, he can terminate his contract. Red Bull until 2028. He is currently 3rd, but with just a 9-point lead over Russell. And after the withdrawal in Austria, the risk is real, and if he were to finish in 4th place at Spa, everything could be up in the air. It's not entirely new in 2023. There was talk of clauses related to Mutmarco, and the same Mutmarco confirmed months ago the existence of performance-related clauses in Max's contract. Now the paddock is preparing for a possible earthquake, given Wolff has never hidden his interest in Verstappen, and even Russell, not exactly his best friend, has admitted. It would be crazy not to try. But be careful, the times are very tight. In fact, Russell and Antonelli are expiring at the end of 2025. Wolff doesn't want to keep them hanging for too long. If Verstappen doesn't free up right after Spa, Mercedes might choose to go ahead with its current lineup. In practice, either Max decides in August or the train might pass. The real issue is Christian Horner. In fact, according to Amos, Max doesn't rule out staying in Red Bull, but he has one condition, and that is to empower Christian Horner. The team principal today controls everything: area, races, technical development, power unit, and even marketing. The Verstappen clan, led by Dad Jos, no longer accepts that it's a one-man show. They want a more shared management. Like in McLaren, in essence, they want Horner to only be the team principal, not the operational chief executive officer of the team. And behind this push are years of friction, never subsided tensions, and a growing feeling that the Red Bull environment has become too unbalanced. After the race in Austria, Horner launched a clear jab. Mercedes a minute behind McLaren. A direct message to Max: do you really want to go where you have no guarantee of winning? It's a psychological move to still present themselves as the only competitive team for the title. But the risk is that Max is no longer convinced by the rhetoric. Because what he wants is not just a fast car, he wants decision-making power, stability, and a long-term vision. If Verstappen finishes Spa outside the top 3, can he leave? And there, unseen scenarios open up. Mercedes frees up, Russell, Antonelli falls back in weight, Verstappen signs for Brackley, or Verstappen decides to go to Aston Martin instead of Alonso, Stroll. Or Red Bull changes the internal structure to retain him, perhaps by freezing Horner's power and opening a McLaren-style management. But if nothing moves, watch out for plot twists. Because Verstappen has won everything, and now more than winning, he wants to count for something in the team. And the situation in Red Bull is not to be underestimated, because we saw Verstappen out of the game in Austria due to contact with Kimi Tsunoda. He came in last, so Red Bull scored 0 in Austria for the Constructors' Championship. Without Max, Red Bull currently counts for nothing, and it's a team that inevitably collapses without Max. Even for 2026, everyone says that the Red Bull power unit will not be optimal, but the best one could be the Mercedes, which has given excellent results on the bench. Mercedes wants to maintain the 2026 power unit regulations without changes to the new rules. They have no reason to change them because they are currently the best at that. So Horner tries to hold back Max, showing him the short-term vision of this season, where there is a Mercedes not so competitive that won in Canada. In Austria, it struggled, finishing 70 seconds behind the McLarens with Russell 5th and Kimi retiring. However, at the same time, Mercedes with the Mercedes engine and Aston Martin with the Honda engine could be more competitive in 2026 than Red Bull. And if there really is a clause, as Amos also says, then is Verstappen seriously considering the option of leaving the team? Red Bull lacks a plan B. Lindblad, at only 18, is still too young and needs to develop and mature further. The constant changes to the second driver offer no guarantees. Red Bull's only hope is for Verstappen to remain on the team. Max has also conceded the fight for the title.
Before the accident, Max had already understood everything.
In qualifying, even without the yellow flag, he knew he would take at least 6/10 from Norris. "I'm pushing to the max, but we're behind," he said. For someone who has dominated the last 3 years, this is a brutal reality check. Canada was an exception, not the rule.
The McLaren wing had problems in Austria, it came back dominant.
Max knows we're half a second short. His race ended in turn 3 when Antonelli blocked and hit him full force. There was the end for Kimi, and Horner has no doubts Max is not to blame. He had started well, had gained positions. Without that accident, he could have competed with the Ferraris, said Christian Horner. Having said that, Horner complimented Lawson and also said that Tsunoda did not have a great race with the car, who finds himself with the Red Bull 21 while Verstappen is 61 points behind Piastri.
And with this McLaren that doesn't miss a beat, the recovery seems almost impossible.
Horner knows it. On paper, it's not over, but we have to be realistic. But the most disturbing thing about Red Bull is that there are no developments, no reactions, and the car seems more behind than the first GP showed, while McLaren is consistent. But we also have to see how Mercedes will perform at Silverstone on its home track. Russell hopes to be more competitive. In fact, George is looking forward and hopes in England we have always been competitive. Last year I was on pole. The pace was great. If temperatures are lower, we can return to the front. However, Mercedes continues to experience extreme highs and lows. As Toto Wolff said, nothing went as planned. The long curves, abrasive asphalt, and heat destroyed us. But the gap from Ferrari and McLaren is too big to justify it just like that. Kimi made a mistake in Austria. He didn't brake late, he said. "I tried to avoid the ozone, but I locked the tires, and at that point it was impossible to avoid it." Rookie's move further complicates an already challenging weekend for the team.
But everything.
Wolff commented coolly, "Kimi was unlucky, but we need to understand well what happened at the time of braking."
Focus on the most fascinating backstory.
In fact, Mercedes tested some mechanical solutions in Austria designed to improve behavior with tires.
2026, I said it clearly, Toto Wolff.
"We tried things to better manage these tires, which will be the same next year, but it didn't work.
Be aware that the tires will change.
But many mechanical and frame features will remain central, while their dynamics will be revolutionized." So Mercedes took advantage of a difficult weekend to start collecting data that could be very useful in the new technical cycle. A similar approach to Ferrari, which is already working internally on 2026 concepts related to rear suspension and thermal management. Chauvelin confirmed that heat is Mercedes' real weak point. With Russell struggling to manage the tires throughout the race, Chauvelin understood how the car behaves in extreme situations. And they need to work to get back to fighting for the podium, as happened in Canada.
And Russell.
He was being ironic, suggesting that Formula 1 should only race in winter to avoid tire overheating issues. And we have now seen in the ground effect era how Mercedes performs much better on colder tracks and not on the hotter ones. The overheating issue is something that Mercedes suffers a lot from, not in terms of brakes, which are more of a critical issue for Ferrari, but in terms of tire wear.
And about tires, we need to talk.
Even regarding this Silverstone race, which will be this weekend. In fact, Silverstone turns 75 years old and Pirelli is bringing softer compounds than usual. But watch out. Between accelerated degradation and lurking rain, the weekend turns into a high-risk strategic game.
Whoever mishandles the tires is out.
In 2025, during the British Grand Prix weekend, we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the first ever Formula 1 race, which took place at Silverstone in 1950.
This year, they will bring the C2, C3, C4 tires
one step softer than in 2024, with the aim of increasing degradation, expanding strategic options, and making every stint a challenge.
Last year, the G-Soft and C3 were practically ignored, and this year it will be the average tire and will be decisive from the early stages.
Be aware that the Silverstone track, with its fast curves and constant changes of direction, grinds tires like few other circuits. It's not Spa or Suzuka, but it's close. Be cautious of the English weather, as rain is predicted between Saturday and Sunday, particularly in the afternoon. They may have to do qualifications with soft tires initially, as it might rain later.
The time lost in the pits is only about 20 seconds, but every wrong pit stop costs a race.
So we'll see how the teams perform at Silverstone with this change. Bringing softer C2, C3 and C4 tires compared to last year is definitely an advantage for McLaren.
The very last thing I want to comment on, the test sessions for 2026. Why? The Barcelona tests from January 26th to 30th and the 2 Bahrain test sessions in February have been confirmed.
However, Barcelona's first tests will be private, concealing early issues with the new regulations. There will certainly be longer braking, unstable aerodynamics, unbalanced hybrid, and also reduced tires. The risk of failure in the initial test is genuine, so everything is kept secret. But some photos, some leaks will certainly come out. No television, no press, everything will be locked down. However, it's important to do more test sessions to get to the first race ready. So it's a good thing to test new cars not only in Bahrain, but also in Spain. Certainly the issue of the hybrid, which might not work and not give enough power to the cars, remains a critical issue. Let me know your opinion on all the topics we covered in the video, from Ferrari's lift and coast to Verstappen's exit clause to the situation at Mercedes. I'm curious to read and respond to everyone. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Check out some related videos too. That's all for now. See you next time.